So today I wanted to talk about coming to the light. Beginning of John's Gospel is obviously well known and well read, and I thought I'd read the first couple of verses of the first chapter of John this morning because it reflects very much upon the light. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. This man came for a witness, to bear witness of the light, that all through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That was the true light, which gives light to every man coming into the world. And I particularly this morning wanted to dwell on verse 5 of that, in the middle of that reading, where it says, "And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it." Now, when you read through your Bibles, you'll often come across a footnote on the last part of that verse, "and the darkness did not comprehend it." And in some translations, it doesn't say comprehend or understand at all. It says overcome. And so you have this interesting possibility. There are two possibilities of translation with this word, comprehend. It could be to comprehend, it could be to overcome. Either of those are legitimate ways of translating this word. The word means to take hold of or seize. To grasp something. Now we talk about understanding. I grasp a concept, you see? But the other way I can grasp something is to control it, you see? And this is where we have this dual translation possibility of this word. So the darkness did not grasp it. It did not comprehend it. It did not overcome it. They go together, those two ideas. Because the thing is, what the darkness can understand, what it can comprehend, it can overcome. And those two are tied together. So good triumphs because it understands the nature of evil, whereas evil will never triumph because it will never understand the true nature of good. The same is true of truth. Truth understands the nature of falsity. Falsity does not understand the nature of truth. And so truth will always overcome. It will always win. And the same is true of the spiritual. The spiritual understands the true nature of the natural, but the natural does not comprehend the spiritual. So which will triumph? The spiritual will triumph. Now there's a really great illustration of this in the children's series Harry Potter. And it comes out in the films. It's highlighted in the films too. The evil character Voldemort, who, we spend these entire series of books and films, he seems to be the one in power. But he is consistently defeated by good, and he is consistently defeated by love. And the reason he is defeated by them is he cannot understand them. And there's an interesting point in the film where he actually acknowledges, I was defeated by love because I didn't understand it. So he understands that he doesn't understand, but even that is not enough to give him power over it. So he's defeated by the nature of love because he cannot comprehend it. Now, I often wave around books that I pick up in op shops, and this is one of them. One of the books that I've picked up in recent weeks. Jordan Peterson is someone who's come to prominence in recent years, and I saw this in the op shop and I thought, well, I better actually read what he has to say. So I've picked up this 12 Rules for Life. And what he talks about in here is that the world is a dark place if we are considering our life only from the perspective of the natural. If we only think of life as entirely natural, then life is suffering. That's the conclusion that he comes to. Now he quotes Leo Tolstoy, and this is what he says. "My position was terrible. I knew that I could find nothing in the way of rational knowledge except a denial of life. And in faith I could find nothing except a denial of reason. And this was even more impossible than a denial of life. According to rational knowledge, it followed that life is evil and people know it. They do not have to live, yet they have lived and they do live, just as I myself had lived, even though I had known for a long time that life is meaningless and evil." It's a dark understanding of life, isn't it? He identifies 4 ways of escaping this impossible situation. He says the first is to retreat into childlike ignorance of the problem. The second is the pursuit of mindless pleasure. The third is to continue to drag out a life that is evil and meaningless, knowing beforehand that nothing can come of it. And the fourth is to destroy life once one has realized life is evil and meaningless. I look at modern philosophy and I hear what people say, and so much of it tells us what I've just told you, that we suffer. And modern philosophy stops there. So it's nihilistic. In other words, it tells us that life is meaningless. But it is also fatalistic in that it tells us there are no answers. There's nothing to be done other than to observe that life is meaningless and life is suffering, and that the world is a fallen and corrupt place, and there's nothing we can do about it. All we can do in life is complain and suffer. That is the world from a natural point of view. So what right do we have to celebrate Christmas? What right do we have to proclaim that there is light in the world? You see, there is a power in the world that modern philosophy, that the natural perspective is blind to. They call it imaginary because they cannot see it. They cannot understand it. They cannot grasp it. But neither can they rule or destroy it because of that. When Swedenborg talks about contemporary beliefs about angels and life after death and the spiritual, He talks about this idea that people have a sense that, angels must be like wisps of smoke or wisps of air or the ether. They're things we can't grasp, we can't hold on to, we can't really see because they're imaginary. And what it tells us is that those people, it's an earthbound and a natural way of understanding life. They have no grasp of the spiritual life. In Heaven and Hell, I've read this year that angels of the lower heavens who seek to go up into the higher heavens, they're sometimes permitted to do that, but they go there and they see nothing and no one. It seems to them empty, as though there's nothing there. And yet, Swedenborg says, they're surrounded by angels, thousands of angels, but they can't see a thing. Here's something that Swedenborg says. So he's talking here about the people who are recently deceased. Then they began to see the cause of that blindness and ignorance, which is that external things, which are things relating to the world and the body, had so occupied and filled their minds that they could not be raised into the light of heaven. For when matters relating to the body and the world are loved, as much as they are at the present day, nothing but darkness flows into the mind when they go further. So my question is, how can the natural mind, this thing that sees only darkness and meaninglessness, how can the natural mind know that such a power, that such a light exists? And I'm going to come back to Mr. Peterson's answer. Jordan Peterson says that evil is not inevitable. We have a choice. So he talks about child abusers, for example. He says that whilst many child abusers have themselves been abused as children, there's no inevitability about it. So, whilst most child abusers have been abused, not everybody who has been abused becomes a child abuser. In fact, not even most of them. You see, some people pass through that dreadful circumstance. They suffer the greatest of evils, and yet they make a choice for something better. Evil is not inevitable. And people can choose the good, even following the most difficult and darkest and evil of circumstances. So what is the antidote to suffering? What is the light? And Mr. Peterson suggests that we not become consumed with the evil and the suffering that goes on in the world, especially with our own suffering. He suggests we seek to make the world a better place. And the first step, he suggests, is actually to recognise our own propensity for evil and to work against it. That is the light. So what happens often is that when I complain about all the things that I suffer, I conveniently overlook all those things in my own life which bring suffering, either to myself or to others. So he goes on and he quotes another famous Russian author, Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And he says that the question of our lives is not, have I suffered evil? Because we all have. We've all suffered evil and tragedy in our lives. The question is, have I chosen to do what I understand to be good, despite that evil and suffering? He goes on and asks, how have I personally contributed to the catastrophe of my own life? And can I stop making those mistakes? And can I repair the damage done? Now, the Word calls us to celebrate the coming of the light and to make every difference, every effort to come to the light ourselves. I'm going to quote from John's Gospel again, because John's Gospel has light really throughout the entire book. Chapter 3, and this is the condemnation, that the light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. For everyone practicing evil hates the light, and does not come to the light, lest his deeds should be exposed. But he who does the truth comes to the light, that his deeds may be clearly seen, that they have been done in God. And then in the prophecy of Isaiah, we read one at the beginning of the service, if you remember. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. But as you go through Isaiah, it continues. There's many more verses, and I've chosen a few of them. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness, and will hold your hand. I will keep you and give you as a covenant to the people, a light to the Gentiles. If you read chapters 58, 59 and 60 of Isaiah, there's this kind of a growing crescendo of light which takes place. 58, verse 10, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted soul, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as noonday. The passage that I read for the children, arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. And then finally, chapter 60, verses 19 and 20. The sun shall no longer be your light by day, nor for brightness shall the moon give light to you, but the Lord will be to you an everlasting light, and your God your glory. Your sun shall no longer go down, nor shall your moon withdraw itself. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and the days of your mourning shall be ended. You know, we all experience sadnesses and setbacks. We all suffer in one way or another. It might be at the hand of so-called blind fate, or it might be at the hand of others who mete out evil upon us. But does that mean I am excused when I do what is wrong? Does it mean that I should become bitter and spend my time complaining? Whilst it's understandable that that might take place, it's not necessary, and it will never lead to a good outcome. So the choice that Christmas sets before us is to come to the light, or to continue to dwell in darkness. What are you going to do?